Lord of Mysteries. My Identities Echoes Across Time. Chapter 481 to 490. We're simply seeking self-discovery, or perhaps independence. Lynn smiled as he looked at him, suddenly shifting the topic. Alright, let's stop talking about this any further and it won't align with the content restrictions. Let's go, Klein. Now that you've accepted part of your future self's memories, it's time for you to avenge the wrongs from the past. Lynn made a gesture of invitation, and although his tone wasn't outright goading, it was clear that he was just short of having, "I'm bored, I want to see rivers of blood," written on his face. Klein twitched his mouth, but his mind was already filled with fragmented memories. In those glimpses, his future self was being chased by Zeratul. His dogs had even died trying to save him, mercilessly slaughtered by Zeratul. No, the more he thought about it, the angrier he became. Although Klein didn't believe such a future would happen to him, he did feel that he needed to do something for his future self. Fortunately, there was something he could do now. In the core of Foggy Town, inside the pitch-black church, where the statue of the Mother of the Sky sat behind the altar, Zeratul, who was pondering when the town would welcome a new Beyonder to release him from the prison of this historical projection, suddenly sensed two new visitors. Finally, another fool has arrived. Zeratul muttered the line he had repeated countless times. He was thinking about how to trick someone into opening the door when his thoughts abruptly halted upon seeing the two newcomers. He recognized one of them instantly. The moment he saw the figure, he knew who it was. Lynn Sotos, the Angel of Secrets, was a being whose origins were mysterious and whose strength was equally enigmatic. It was said that he was on good terms with several true gods and angels, acting entirely according to his whims, a powerful and troublesome figure. Zeratul hadn't encountered this angel during the fourth epoch, as at that time, the head of the Zeratul family was still the old Zeratul, not his younger self. But the younger Zeratul had heard his father mention this angel before, and although that memory had long since been tossed aside, it resurfaced the moment he laid eyes on Lynn. Of course, Zeratul failed to realize that his memory had been tampered with. Why would the Angel of Secrets appear here? Right, his father had mentioned something about the Angel of Secrets having an interest in Antigonus. Old Zeratul's expression had been complicated when discussing this matter, but the younger Zeratul had no time to analyze it further. His attention quickly shifted to the person accompanying the Angel of Secrets, and his brows furrowed. Unlike the infamous Angel of Secrets, the younger Zeratul didn't recognize the person walking beside him. However, as a Beyonder of the Fool Pathway, or more accurately, a wraith whose true body had gone mad, Zeratul keenly sensed something unusual about this individual. A historical projection. As Zeratul pondered this, he noticed the Angel of Secrets was observing him closely, only to sigh in disappointment. Just as I thought, the Attendant of Mysteries characteristic has already been extracted. What remains here is merely a consciousness, Lynn remarked, clearly disappointed. Before meeting Zeratul, he had been hoping to fight and claim the Attendant of Mysteries characteristic. Unfortunately, after careful observation, Lynn concluded that Zeratul's historical projection did not contain the characteristic. Coupled with rumors of the out-of-control Zeratul's body in the outside world, Lynn was fairly certain the characteristic had been absorbed by Zeratul's true body. However, it seems there's still some value here, Lynn muttered, rubbing his chin and eyeing Zeratul a few more times. He smiled. No wonder this historical projection has lasted so long. It's sustained by a fragment of the Miracle Invoker characteristic. Zeratul felt an eerie chill as Lynn scrutinized him, as if his entire being was laid bare, with no secrets left. What brings you here, sir? Zeratul finally asked, deciding to take the initiative. At the same time, he held onto a sliver of hope. No matter the reason for their arrival, the moment they attempted to leave, they would need to open the door. Once the door opened, he could re-establish contact with his true body outside and return to normal. Probably to beat you up, Lynn pondered for a second before answering, then glanced at Klein. The improved historical projection will consume less spirituality. With your current level, you can probably maintain it for 15 seconds. Go ahead, if you win, you'll obtain a Miracle Invoker characteristic. Klein didn't respond. In truth, He was still adapting to his abilities, or rather, the abilities of the future half-Lord of Mysteries. It was far too advanced for someone at Sequence 5 like him. If not for the historical projection's instinctive combat abilities, Klein would have struggled to even figure out how to fight. The gap between their levels was immense. With more time, he could perhaps master these abilities, but there wasn't much time now. So, in the end, Klein simply let the historical projection take over, while he observed from the sidelines, absorbing combat experience as he watched the projection beat Zeratul down. It was a thorough thrashing. Although Zeratul's historical projection contained the Miracle Invoker characteristic, against the future Lord of Mysteries projection, it was a one-sided battle, as if a father was disciplining his son. Zeratul had no chance to fight back. Before Klein fully understood what had happened, he found that he had already seized control of Zeratul's historical projection. At this moment, Zeratul truly became a prisoner trapped within his own historical projection. Clap, clap, clap. Applause echoed from the side. Klein looked over and saw the Angel of Secrets approaching, clapping his hands. He took Zeratul's historical projection from Klein, allowing Klein to release the combat mode of his own projection. This gave Klein's spirituality, which had been largely drained, a much-needed respite. However, he didn't completely dismiss the projection. He continued maintaining it at a low consumption level. Klein could sense that he could sustain this state for quite some time, and since his spirituality would be utterly exhausted once the projection was dismissed, he decided to keep it going until they left Foggy Town. End of chapter. Are you expecting us to open the door, allowing your consciousness to reconnect with your body, and thus escape madness to officially become an attendant of mysteries? Lynn smiled as he looked at Zeratul, who was sealed in the historical projection. Zeratul's heart sank, but he remained silent. What a pity. It was true initially, but now you're formally sealed within this historical projection. Lynn spoke with a smile, delivering his ruthless words. What he said was indeed the truth because, in the future, the Fool's historical projection would genuinely seal Zeratul's consciousness into this historical projection, which originally served as his vessel. The method likely involved the path of the door's sealing and the Fool's grafting. It could be said that if the original Zeratul was only unable to leave the church and return to the outside world due to the Evernight goddess's concealment, needing someone to open the door to regain freedom, then the current Zeratul would remain sealed, even if brought outside, unless he escaped the seal. At this moment, Zeratul's expression darkened, not only because he knew what the other party said was true but also because he realized that the ability used by the historical projection that just attacked him seemed a little odd. Could it be that the Lord of Mysteries has already been born? Impossible. The uniqueness of the Fool is still with Antigonus. Even if Amon devoured Mr. Door outside, he couldn't have ascended to the Lord of Mysteries, right? Zeratul's mind was working hard, but he couldn't figure out where a Lord of Mysteries had emerged from. Lynn didn't care about what Zeratul thought. He merely turned to Klein and said, "As for him, my suggestion is to keep him locked here. When you need the characteristic of an attendant of mysteries, you can use him to locate the maddened original body of Zeratul. However, the seal formed by a historical projection alone isn't secure enough. I'll have Bethel add a few more layers of sealing later, ensuring he can't escape." Klein had no objections to this. He didn't particularly want to release the tiger back into the wild either. As for killing Zeratul, considering the miracle abilities of a miracle invoker, who knows if killing him here would result in his resurrection in some remote corner of the world. Right, I'll extract the miracle invoker characteristic for you. Lynn suddenly remembered something and smiled as he looked at Zeratul. A few minutes later, Zeratul was lying on the ground like a lifeless fish, while Lynn held a fresh miracle invoker characteristic between his fingers. You won't need this for now. Should I help you divide it and craft it into some mystical items? Lynn asked, playing with the miracle invoker characteristic between his fingers. What will I need to pay? Klein asked, reluctantly tearing his gaze away from the characteristic. It wasn't that his will was weak, but rather the inherent allure of the pathway was too strong. Let me think. Lynn made a thoughtful expression, somewhat troubled. It seems I don't lack anything. How about this, if I disappear one day, could I trouble you to look after my friends? Klein was taken aback, staring at Lynn in astonishment. I probably won't be gone for long. If all goes well, I should return before the apocalypse. In the meantime, just watch over my dear employees and friends. Lynn continued with a smile, as if unaware of Klein's gaze. Of course, you don't need to take care of them too much. They're not helpless babies. Just keep an eye on them. I'm mainly worried they'll get themselves killed before I return, and then I'd have to go and rescue them. And, Lynn looked into Klein's eyes and smiled, saying, take care of yourself. Though I'm not sure if the world will still follow its original course after I leave, there are precedents. But no matter what, the facts I've changed won't be erased by fate. Those I've brought back won't revert to their original state. Quote. Lynn said this, then couldn't help but laugh, adding, so, even if you're unlucky and still have to fall into a slumber as in your original fate, fighting the celestial worthy in your dreams, things are already different from before. You now have Bethel as your teacher, Russell as a fellow transmigrator, and many who care about you and are waiting for you to wake up. So, remember, the celestial worthy isn't that scary. Just give him a good beating. Lynn wasn't entirely certain if Klein's fate would still follow its original path if he suddenly left. After all, the past he had changed was free of the butterfly effect, and from a dialectical perspective, this moment was also part of the past for him. So, there might still be a situation where Klein, despite all the roads laid out for him, would have to ascend as the Lord of Mysteries prematurely and fall into a slumber to battle the former Lord of Mysteries. After all, strictly speaking, the Klein walking such a path still existed, and he was, in fact, the same person as the Klein standing before Lynn. It was just two flowers blooming on different timelines, as was the case with many of Lynn's other friends, seemingly different, but ultimately the same. But one thing Lynn was sure of was that, though the butterfly effect was absent, the facts he changed wouldn't be erased by fate. So, even if Klein followed the old path, Lynn wasn't particularly worried. He believed that the fool of the original novel could make it through, and the Klein he knew now could do the same. Listening to Lynn's words, which sounded like some kind of last testament, Klein opened his mouth, wanting to say something, but found it all stuck in his throat. Because Klein realized he couldn't help the other party at all. What Lynn, or rather the Angel of Secrets, was dealing with, was far beyond his reach. Not just him, even Mr. Door had almost lost himself just by coming into brief contact with the other party. This left Klein feeling lost. He wasn't even sure if he could help Lynn, even if he reached the peak of the sequences Lynn envisioned, to the point where he could save the world. Don't belittle yourself. Your existence is quite important. The Angel of Secrets seemed to know what he was thinking and suddenly spoke. I've been reflecting lately, pondering the significance of this journey of mine. Eventually, I came to a realization. Besides power, the greatest thing I've gained from this journey is all of you. In this world, after becoming an angel, one needs faith and anchors to maintain their humanity, and I, too, need anchors to preserve my humanity. Lynn spoke seriously. He had indeed pondered the meaning of his journey after losing his memory, and he had truly come to this understanding. Becoming the demon of knowledge was important. But meeting family and friends worth cherishing, experiencing sadness and joy on the journey, those were just as important. Perhaps even more so than the former. End of chapter. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Becoming a demon of knowledge was one of the cornerstones of Lynn's independence, while his connection to others served as the anchor to his humanity. This anchor was the foothold that allowed Lynn Sotos to maintain his identity amidst the countless bubbles, preventing him from becoming just Lynn Sotheth in the process. Without these people he cared about, even if Lynn Sotos became independent in the end, he would only be a shell. Perhaps he would drift for a while, but eventually, he would return to the sea of bubbles, no longer special in any way. On the contrary, as long as someone remembered him, as long as someone cared for him, Lynn Sotos would always have meaning. Even if he faded temporarily, he would eventually return through those memories. If you could become the Lord of Mysteries, that would be even better. As the pillar of the world, you could serve as my anchor, which would be quite helpful. Lynn smiled and looked at Klein, saying, "So, remember me, my friend. As long as someone remembers me, I will never truly disappear." "All right, I will." Klein was silent for a few seconds before solemnly responding. "Good." Lynn chuckled lightly and then turned his gaze toward the direction of Zaratul's long missing door, stretching lazily. "Next, let's go see Antigonus. I wonder if the half-asleep little doggy still remembers me." The atmosphere, which had been somewhat heavy moments before, lightened again, as if nothing had happened. Everything seemed to be just an illusion for Klein. Lynn quickly arrived at the door to the hall where Antigonus was imprisoned. He pulled out a black obsidian slab from somewhere, embedded it in the door, and then carved a symbol representing "open" on it. Light began to appear along the lines of the symbol, gathering together until, amidst the brightness, an illusory door opened. The structure behind the door appeared more like a false projection than a real building, revealing an empty hall. No, to be precise, the hall wasn't entirely empty. Suspended from the ceiling were numerous secret puppets, male and female, old and young, but all equally exquisite in appearance. They looked as if they were holding a gathering that would make anyone obsessed with beauty ecstatic, or perhaps performing a grand opera, waiting for applause from the audience. However, hidden behind this spectacle was a danger that could deter any Beander below the level of an angel. Invisible threads extended from the hall, and the one who stood in their path, right in front of the door, was Lynn. Lynn, unperturbed, simply smiled and said, "Such enthusiasm from a little cute doggy. So, Antigo, have you decided to become my pet?" At these words, Klein, who had been on edge and would have been pulled into the hall by the spirit threads if not for the protection of the historical projection of the future fool, twitched slightly. For a moment, he didn't even know how to respond. What surprised him even more was that as soon as Lynn's words fell, the previously eager spirit threads retreated in a flash, much faster than when they had appeared, as if terrified that they would suffer if they lingered. Klein. For some reason, although surprised, he wasn't particularly shocked. He could only think, as expected of the infamous Lynn. What exactly had Lynn done to Antigonus? Even though the latter had gone mad, he still feared him so much. "I've never done anything to the cute doggy. Don't slander me," Lynn said, as if sensing Klein's thoughts, with a smile. "Little Antigo isn't afraid of me because of what I did before. He's merely instinctively fearing the aura I carry now." After all, to be safe, Lynn had borrowed a little power from his main body, which naturally imbued him with a trace of that aura. For the present Antigonus, whose consciousness was chaotic and who was essentially a blend of a celestial worthy and Antigonus, with only instincts remaining, this aura would only evoke fear. After all, the closer you are to the concept of mysteries, the more easily you are assimilated by me, Lynn muttered softly, so quietly that Klein couldn't hear it clearly. Without further explanation, Lynn casually strolled into the hall. He quickly arrived at an ancient stone seat. On the chair, countless transparent maggots squirmed together, growing wildly, extending near invisible tentacles. "Ah, so gross. Japanese media totally ruined the image of having tentacles," Lynn muttered, glaring at the pile of maggots before turning away in disgust. Klein, still under the filter of his historical projection, wasn't harmed by the mythological form but was still disgusted by the mass of maggots and tentacles, his face turning pale. Would I have to become something like that in the future? And did he really need to make me remember all that stuff from the internet? Lynn also found the sight distasteful. If Antigonus had been in a normal state or in his furry form, he might have enjoyed catching up. But a pile of uncontrollable maggots? No thanks. He preferred something fluffy, even if it was only superficially so. Sigh. Lynn shook his head, then telekinetically pulled the full card from the mass of tentacles. He didn't touch it himself but tossed it over to Klein. "Here, take it. You earned this with your own picture." Klein, noticing Lynn's clear disgust. "You just don't want to touch something that tentacles have touched, do you?" Though feeling a bit nauseous from the tentacles, Klein, who would eventually become like this entity, managed to adapt, grabbing the full card with a mixture of excitement and anticipation. The trip to the foggy town had yielded far more than Klein had ever imagined. It almost seemed like Lynn knew his time was running short and was in a rush to arm him. The excitement Klein had felt moments ago faded, replaced with a heavy heart as he looked at the Angel of Secrets, silently repeating the name, Lynn Sotos, in his mind. He didn't know what else he could do for Lynn, but since Lynn wanted him to remember him, Klein would ensure he did so. Alright, mission accomplished. Let's head back. Lynn finally snapped out of his daze, or more accurately, returned his attention to the present after briefly focusing on the fourth epic. Just now, his fourth epic self had successfully advanced to Sequence 1 Illuminator. Although the potion didn't instantly digest, most of it was already absorbed. The rest would be resolved once he introduced some revolutionary technology to the Solomon Empire. Perfect. In high spirits, Lynn smiled at Klein and said, "Work hard on your advancement, Klein. I hope by the end of the year, I can offer my blessing for your ascension to demigod." End of chapter. As it turns out, time always flies when you need it most. Since Klein's journey to the foggy town, he resumed his previous life routine, hunting pirates across the 5 seas while occasionally traveling to the Russell era with Lynn. In the midst of these events, they encountered various situations. For example, they once met the Admiral Iceberg, entering an adventure inside a book called Grossel's Travels, where they successfully rescued a long-trapped adventurer team. This was thanks to the timely appearance of the Angel of Secrets, who used special methods to stabilize the team members. Without it, figures like Ciatas would have aged to death the moment they left the book. There was also an instance when, at Lynn's urging, Klein attempted to hunt the Admiral of Ailment. The opponent, however, used a technique called, "Mom, save me," which led to Klein responding with, "Dad's here," a standoff between two figures of great power, neither willing to fully engage, resulting in a peaceful outcome. Additionally, the name of vampire Duke Dwayne Dantes from the Russell era spread beyond Trier during their travels. Despite being labeled as harmless by the church, they were pursued by wild self-proclaimed justice warriors. Yes, during an outing, Klein, as vampire Duke Dantes, was attacked by an overly righteous novice Beander. Due to the inexperience of the attacker, not only did Klein remain completely unharmed, but the whole situation became somewhat farcical. Klein found it rather amusing, despite being exasperated. As for the novice Beander, they were later recruited into Steam Church for training, on Klein's recommendation. Many other events unfolded during this period, leading Klein to marvel at the excitement of his life as time quietly moved towards the end of December. Now, less than a week before the new year, Klein had finished digesting his marionettist potion, thanks to the time-traveling cheat, and he was also prepared with the materials needed for the Bizarro Sorcerer potion. The main ingredient was already in hand, and the auxiliary materials would be easy to acquire, thanks to an upcoming trade with the City of Silver. So, it's decision time, Gehrman. Are we heading straight back to Backland to prepare for the upcoming major events, or do you want to fish for a bit before we go? Lynn asked with a smile, leaning against the window of a hotel in Byam, while multitasking with his typical efficiency. For Klein, the past 2 months had been busy and exciting. For Lynn, however, these 2 months had been relatively relaxed. In the second epic, Lynn was participating in the ancient sun gods' war against the dragons to liberate humanity. The progress was going well, and in a few days, the Dragon of Imagination would be defeated, ushering in a new epic, the third epic, belonging to both the ancient sun god and humanity. In the fourth epic, Lynn was steadily digesting the Illuminator potion, mainly by overseeing Artisan doing 24/7 shift, and continuing to change the Church of the True Creator. Thanks to Lynn's exceptional persuasion skills and formidable strength, the infiltration was progressing smoothly, and the situation of the True Creator was improving. The only issue was that Solomon's gaze toward Lynn had grown more suspicious, leading Lynn to suspect Solomon might be planning to ambush him. In the fifth epic, things were even more leisurely. Lynn's main body traveled with Klein, stirring up trouble and having fun, while his divine incarnation stayed in Backland, either supervising the Aurora Order's progress or chatting with old friends like the Snake of Mercury. By the way, to help Bernadette ascend to Sage, Lynn had instructed Mr. A to make contact with the Augustus royal family, signaling that the Aurora Order wanted a role in the upcoming major event, summoning their lord. Of course, the plan was to bug the ritual, ensuring Bernadette would stop the summoning, allowing the ceremony to proceed without consequence. And there's no hidden sage to interfere now, Lynn mused internally. Though he had almost forgotten about the hidden sage, he later realized the absence of its influence had no significant impact, confirming that his possession of the sage's uniqueness had not caused a butterfly effect. In fact, the Moses ascetic order's followers seemed to have adjusted well to the hidden sage's disappearance. Lynn, amused by this, decided to have his divine incarnation wear the hidden sage's mantle and occasionally fool the members of the Moses ascetic order. No one seemed to notice that their god had changed. If I wanted to return to Backland, I wouldn't be here now, Klein replied, looking at Lynn as he polished his weapon. After 2 months of trials, Klein had fully digested the marionettist potion, gathered all the necessary materials for the Bizarro sorcerer potion, and now, only the hunt for a despair which remained. He and Lynn were in Byam to lure the Rose School of Thought into their trap. Their enemies had been watching them closely, especially after Klein took down Admiral of Blood Senor and his team. Sensing the Rose School's heightened interest in Klein's movements, he and Lynn, along with their allies, had decided to turn the tables. Now, they were just waiting for the Rose School to take the bait. Man, you won't believe how long I've been waiting to use that joke in the title. Law. End of chapter. Undoubtedly, the plan that Lynn and his team adopted was essentially bait fishing. Anyone with a brain would be able to perceive the trap and understand its true nature. However, the Rose School of Thought, being a hidden organization worshipping outer gods, consisted mainly of cruel and insane members. How much sanity they had left was unknown, so even if they detected the trap, they might not care. Moreover, although the bait was obvious, the allure of Saphira Castle was undeniable, an irresistible temptation for the bitch tree. And the hidden second lure, Reinette Tinacare, was a major threat the Rose School of Thought had long wanted to eliminate. That evening, as Jan Kottman was reading the latest intelligence reports on the Church of the Sea God in the Cathedral of the Waves, he suddenly sensed a commotion outside the city. It seemed that at least a semi-divine being was causing it. Kottman. Did the Church of Storms lose its edge, or were all the hidden organizations suddenly eager for trouble? Though furious, Jan Kottman couldn't instantly teleport to the battlefield, but he rose into the air, left the Cathedral of the Waves, and cast a lightning strike from the sky at the most sinister presence among the intruders. At the same time, he ordered the Punishers to activate the corresponding sealed artifacts. Despite his anger, Kottman could sense that the entities battling outside the city were no ordinary foes. Meanwhile, in the forest on the outskirts of Byam. Wow, no wonder Storm God has such a hot temper. Watching the abomination's avatar struck by Kottman's lightning, Lynn couldn't help but comment. Stop admiring it, dodge. He had barely spoken when Klein pulled him aside, perfectly avoiding the surrounding trees that had just come to life and tried to attack them. While diving out of harm's way, Lynn activated a talisman he had thrown earlier. Unlike his usual approach of overwhelming his enemies with numerous talismans and scrolls, this time, he used a semi-divine talisman of the darkness pathway. Its effect was simple, pulling the target into a dream to induce sleep. Thus, one of the Rose School of Thought's demigod, a puppet at sequence 4, suddenly fell into a dazed state. I'm telling you, why don't we forget about waiting for the big event in Backland and take down this puppet now? You can ascend to Bizarro Sorcerer right away. Lynn eagerly suggested, I can buff you, and we have enough spectators here. As he spoke, Lynn glanced toward a clearing. It made sense, even without considering the value of this chaotic battle, Adam had already appeared in the air. Lynn wasn't surprised, he was used to Adam potentially appearing out of thin air anywhere. Taking advantage of the moment while the puppet was caught in a dream, Klein raised his gun and shot the opponent, but he hesitated, acknowledging that Lynn had a point. Although his original plan was to eliminate that despair witch for Ascension, considering the large-scale damage she could inflict, Klein felt it safer to hand her over to the Angel of Secrets or another big shot to prevent unexpected disasters. As for the current situation, it was straightforward. As in the original story, where Klein caused a huge commotion outside Byam and the Rose School of Thought responded by sending a bloodthirsty admiral and a semi-divine ally, along with a Sequence 1 Abomination's projection. This time Lynn and his group had lured out even more members from the Rose School of Thought. They had sent not just two demigods to chase Klein and Lynn, but one of them had brought a vessel capable of holding the power of an abomination, summoning Sua's projection, much more intense than the original transmitted power. By praying to the chained god or bitch tree, they isolated the area from the spirit world. In other words, if the bait plan was only led by Reinette, this lineup would be enough to consume her entirely. Despite her being a Sequence 2 ancient wraith, she was heavily injured and couldn't fully unleash her power. Fortunately, the Angel of Secrets was reliable, bearing the brunt of the battle with Sua's projection, while Reinette focused on the other demigods. The remaining demigod was left, as planned, for Klein to confront. As for why Lynn, with his hacking-like abilities, hadn't yet wiped out Sua's projection, it was simple. He was putting on a show of evenly matched combat while quietly using the projection to locate the true body, planning to drag it here later. After all, with such a big scene, wouldn't it be unsatisfactory to not kill a Sequence 1 to liven things up? Lynn thought so while buffing Klein in his duel with the puppet demigod, he discreetly bypassed the surveillance of the bitch tree's power. Once he pinpointed the true body's location, he summoned the Rose School of Thought's Sequence 1 directly, sealing the area to prevent Sua's escape and contain their ensuing battle from spreading to Byam. It's you. The bitch tree had been watching the battle, seems to finally recognize Lynn, making the Angel of Secrets smile and look toward it beyond the barrier with a greeting. Yes, it's me. Lynn also couldn't help but scratch his chin. So, bitch tree hadn't recognized him until now. Tisk, seems like Saphira Castle's lure was indeed powerful. While he mused, the bewildered Sua's true body was shocked to find that the bitch tree's gaze and power suddenly withdrew as if encountering something unclean, abandoning this area. And its most loyal follower Sua was clearly left behind, completely discarded as the bitch tree fled swiftly, apparently fearful that if it delayed any longer, not only Sua but also it might suffer. Sua. So, what exactly happened? How did things end up like this? End of chapter. The abomination Sua couldn't understand. Everything happening before him was beyond his worldview. He had never imagined that the mother tree of desire, whom he viewed as the greatest, could also experience fear. This reality was an even greater blow to him than being abandoned. How pitiful, to be discarded so ruthlessly. The Angel of Secrets looked at Sua, who appeared weak, pitiful, and helpless in this moment, showing a look of sympathy. So let me send you to rest. Hopefully, you'll be a better person in your next life. Meanwhile, on the other side, with Lynn's cover, Klein opened the sealed box and raised the sea god scepter toward the demigod puppet. In an instant, lightning engulfed the area. As always, when Cotman arrived on the scene, the battle had already ended. Only a few people remained at the scene, including a familiar face that Cotman had become all too familiar with recently. Standing amidst the ruins, that familiar figure greeted him with a bright smile. Cleaning up after the battle again, old man. For a moment, Cotman wanted to strike the other with a bolt of lightning, but considering the divine message from the Lord, he held back. Taking a deep breath, he looked around at the chaos and the still present Angel of Secrets, and politely asked, "Could someone tell me what happened here?" Roughly, the Rose School of Thought's scoundrels launched a despicable attack on us. Fortunately, I'm skilled at summoning help, and a big shot came to counter them, ultimately managing to kill Sua and two other unknown demigods. Lynn tilted his head, giving a simple summary of the events. Incidentally, Reinette Tinacare had already taken her spoils and left, having struck a deal with the Angel of Secrets regarding Sua's characteristic. She would contribute enough in the coming years to exchange for this prize belonging to Lynn. Hearing Lynn's words, Cotman was stunned. Taking a deep breath, he confirmed, "You killed the abomination Sua." His tone carried an unmistakable incredulity. As a frequent presence across the 5 seas, Cotman often interacted with the Rose School of Thought and was very familiar with who Sua was. A Sequence 1 angel, Sua was also closely connected with the chained god, suspected to be their progeny. Killing such an angel was far more challenging than dealing with an ordinary Sequence 1. "I have Sua's body with me, but I doubt it's suitable for you to view," said the Angel of Secrets. I'll report this to His Holiness. Kotman didn't insist on seeing Su's body, knowing that as a Sequence 3, direct exposure to a mythical entity could have severe repercussions. As you wish, the Angel of Secrets replied indifferently, turning his attention back to Klein, whom he protected by his side. Not for any other reason, but because Klein, being equipped with an artifact and aided by Lynn, had indeed managed to kill the Rose School of Thought's demigod puppet. Thus, with the appearance of Adam, the strongest spectator, who witnessed the event and applied a buff, Klein swiftly prepared and ingested the Bizarro Sorcerer potion, choosing to ascend. When Kotman arrived, Klein was in the midst of ascending, with the Angel of Secrets personally safeguarding him to ensure he could intervene if anything went awry. Thankfully, Mr. Fool was still Mr. Fool. Although the plan deviated slightly, Klein successfully ascended to Bizarro Sorcerer. It seems I can offer my blessings early for your ascension to demigod. Well done, said the Angel of Secrets, watching Klein as he familiarized himself with the abilities of a Bizarro Sorcerer, unable to suppress a smile. It's all thanks to you, Klein replied humbly, feeling a bit sentimental. I never imagined I'd ascend to demigod so soon. It was something Klein couldn't have dreamed of a few months prior. You should be more grateful to the Rose School of Thought for gifting you a demigod, the Angel of Secrets joked, glancing at the puppet demigod that Klein had turned into a marionette. This also means Blood Admiral can finish early. Klein also realized this and started to look at Blood Admiral Senor as if seeing a pile of gold pounds. If he had obtained a demigod marionette from another pathway, Klein wouldn't abandon the highly useful Blood Admiral so easily. However, the puppet perfectly covered the Wraith's abilities, making Senor's existence largely unnecessary now that he had this new marionette. How's the digestion of the Bizarro Sorcerer potion? Asked the Angel of Secrets. I've already digested part of it, though not a large amount. At this pace, it should take less than 6 months to fully digest, Klein replied, clearly acknowledging the benefit of preparing as Dwayne Dantes in advance. To fully digest a Sequence 4 potion in 6 months was enough to astonish anyone in this era. 6 months, the Angel of Secrets frowned slightly, evidently dissatisfied with this timeframe. However, since this wasn't Klein's fault, Lynn merely snapped his fingers to ensure their conversation remained private, and then asked, do you think it's possible to digest the Bizarro Sorcerer potion over the internet? Huh. Klein was momentarily stunned, having never considered such an approach. Or rather, no sane person would have such an idea. I think it's possible, Klein mused, recovering quickly from his initial surprise. Since Bizarro Sorcerer potion digestion isn't bound by distance, it should theoretically work over the internet as well. But, Klein hesitated, both hopeful and uncertain. Wasn't the coordinate of the pre-epic not been confirmed yet? Since he regularly mingled with Lynn, Klein was naturally aware of the ancient coordinates analysis progress. Originally, it would have taken a bit longer, but you're now a demigod. This means you can finally approach those cocoons above the gray fog, those individuals who, like you, hail from the modern era, the Angel of Secrets replied, watching him with a faint sigh. They carry information from the modern era. With them, I should be able to pinpoint the pre-epic's coordinates within a week. With enough connections, that should indeed be possible, Lynn affirmed, providing confirmation. This sent Klein's heart racing. He felt more exhilarated than he had upon achieving his ascension to Bizarro Sorcerer. Seeing Klein's reaction, Lynn smiled and said, so, if all goes well, once we resolve the Backland smog incident, we can begin our journey back to the 21st century. End of chapter. So, if nothing unexpected happens, once we solve the Backland smog incident, we can travel back to the 21st century. Upon hearing this, Klein pursed his lips, wanting to say something but ultimately saying nothing. He instinctively clenched his fists. Finally. Can I go back home for a visit? That's wonderful. This is great, isn't it? Lynn seemed to know what Klein was thinking and smiled. By then, I'll probably visit your hometown for a few days. You wouldn't mind being my tour guide, would you? I wouldn't mind, of course, but my hometown isn't exactly a tourist destination. Don't get your hopes up too high. Klein also smiled but couldn't resist adding a warning. Doesn't matter. As long as there's something to see, I'm not picky. Lynn waved his hand dismissively. Looking at Klein, he seemed to think of something. Speaking of which, now that you've advanced to Bizarro Sorcerer, how about leaving the Despair Witch to you? It's a good chance for practice, and her abilities aren't bad. Klein hesitated for a second before nodding. Alright, but we should move her to another area first. Otherwise, I'm concerned innocent people might get caught up in it. Since they had already dealt a heavy blow to the Rose School of Thought, Lynn and Klein decided not to linger in the 5 Cs. After saying goodbye to their friends, they returned to Backland. In only 2 months, Backland had not changed significantly. Detective Sherlock Moriarty's friends merely thought that their old friend had taken a trip around the new year, which wasn't uncommon. Upon Klein's return, they welcomed him back warmly. Klein met up with his old friends a few times, re-establishing his connections as Sherlock. Afterward, he returned to the church to report and received his 2 months' salary, before being eagerly dragged by Lynn to watch a rehearsal by the Northern Lights Troupe. Yes, Northern Lights Troupe was the public name for the Aurora Order's performance group. After 2 months of rigorous training, the formerly naive and awkward performers had become completely transformed. If nothing went wrong, they would officially debut after the new year, holding their first public performance. Ah, Romeo, why are you Romeo? On stage, Mr. A, in women's attire, recited his lines with deep emotion. His naturally delicate features, enhanced by makeup and a dress, left no hint of masculinity. He looked entirely like a stunning woman. In the special viewing seats at the front, Klein's expression was as complex as it could get as he watched the Aurora Order passionately perform Emperor Roussel's classic play Romeo and Juliet. Although Klein had long known about the Aurora Order's performance troupe through Miss Justice and his conversations with Lynn in the Saphira Castle, seeing these fanatics in costume, performing with such emotional intensity on stage, left him feeling deeply conflicted. After all, he was no longer the person he once was. With fragments of memories from the Fool of the Future, Klein now held a more profound understanding of the Aurora Order. He recalled his original destiny, how he had clashed with Mr. A on the altar, trying to summon the true creator, and how he had fought in Foggy Town, ultimately obtaining the enhanced version of Creeping Hunger. Yet here he was, safe and sound, watching Mr. A play Juliet in Romeo and Juliet, all thanks to Lynn and the Angel of Secrets' intervention. The twists of fate were nothing short of astonishing. This isn't a bad thing, is it? Lynn suddenly said beside him, munching on sunflower seeds as he glanced at Klein. Watching a play is certainly more pleasant than fighting. Indeed. Klein nodded in agreement, taking some seeds from Lynn. By the way, do you think it's wise to have them rehearse here while secretly contacting the Augustus royal family and arranging the summoning ritual for the true creator? Isn't there a risk of them finding out? Klein wasn't worried about the true creator's descent. With Lynn, the Angel of Secrets, Roussel, Bernadette, and himself, the ritual was bound to fail. According to the Angel of Secrets, the true creator's condition had even stabilized somewhat, making him less frenzied than before. So, even if something unexpected happened, they could still control the situation. Klein's only concern was whether the Aurora Order's double dealing would be exposed. After all, the Loan royalty weren't fools. Don't worry, the Evernight Church is covering for us. No one can surpass them in secrecy. Lynn reassured him with a smile. Noting the climax of the performance on stage, he lowered his voice. You know, they're actually doing quite well. It seems these performers really have some talent. Klein nodded in agreement, feeling both conflicted and impressed. The Aurora Order's performance was truly captivating. With this level of skill, could they possibly become nationwide stars? Imagining such a scene, Klein's feelings grew even more complicated. Just then, he heard Lynn let out a soft hum beside him, prompting him to look over in curiosity. What's up? It's nothing. Lynn shook his head, brushing it off. When Klein didn't press further, he quickly shifted his focus to his persona from the Fourth Epic. So, the Tudor Empire really intends to abandon the Night Emperor and seek support from the Seven Gods, triggering the war early. In a conference room in the Solomon Empire, Lynn rubbed his chin thoughtfully. That's what Trunsoest conveyed to me. It shouldn't be wrong. Bethel, who shouldn't have been present here, massaged his temples beside Lynn. It's likely the true creator's improved condition recently has spurred this response. Bethel felt exhausted. As a loyal person, he had no intention of betraying the tutors easily. However, since they had already decided to join forces with the seven gods and betray him, he had no choice. With that, Mr. Dorr, being as direct as ever, had come to inform Lynn without hesitation. Not surprising. Lynn nodded before looking at Medici. So, what do you think? Should we strike first? War is inevitable now. If we make the first move, not only can we seize the initiative, but it could also fulfill the ritual requirements for your ascension to Red Priest. End of chapter. The promotion ceremony for the Red Priest requires sparking a war that sweeps across the entire continent, achieving numerous victories. Although this is technically the Four Emperors era, overall peace still prevails, with only minor skirmishes occurring occasionally between the four nations. A full-scale war has yet to erupt. Under such circumstances, if they preemptively launch an attack on Tudor to exact revenge, it would naturally satisfy the ceremony's requirements. Of course, Medici said, with a fiery glint in his blood-red eyes. He had waited too long for this day and was eager for vengeance against Tudor. What do you think, Solomon? Should we go to war? Lynn looked at Black Emperor Solomon, skipping over the true creator, as he knew that Solomon and Medici shared a similar stance. Since Tudor can't wait, I see no reason to hold back, replied Solomon in a calm tone, his position clear. Lynn nodded, recalling events from the original novel. In that story, the full-scale war among the four emperors erupted much later, ultimately yielding no true winner. The Black Emperor Solomon and the Blood Emperor Tudor both perished, while Night Emperor Trunsoest achieved a partial victory but died shortly afterward alongside his wife. Death God Salinger alone survived, only to later unleash the Pale Disaster. The true victors were the allies of the four emperors, the six gods, the three cautious families, and the true creator's faction, all of whom endured until the world's impending end. Apart from the war god, who fell victim to his role, and Mr. Dorr, who sacrificed himself out of loyalty, everyone else managed to survive. Even Antigonus, who had been insane for half a century, regained sanity and resumed his role as miracle invoker after Klein's ascent as Lord of Mysteries. Compared to the original timeline, the fourth epic, now disrupted by Lynn, was far more complicated. Blood Emperor Tudor's core family members had risen, becoming major threats. Tudor himself, not one to miss an opportunity, had managed to recruit powerful allies from the six gods, including the eternal blazing sun. His plan was to double-cross his own kin and initiate a new battle. As the situation intensified, the Night Emperor Trunsoest secretly aligned with the cautious families, forming alliances. With Lynn as a witness, Trunsoest had even reconciled with Solomon, his former friend turned enemy. Despite past betrayal, gods prioritized interests over grudges. Just as Medici allied with Amon in the original text, Trunsoest and Solomon set aside differences for mutual benefit. Lynn was a significant factor in this reunion. Solomon feared both Lynn and the ever-growing true creator and sought a reliable ally. Meanwhile, Trunsoest, cautious about the future Lynn had described, realized that continued hostilities against Solomon would likely fail. Both men, therefore, reached a mutually beneficial truce. As for Death God Salinger, who had recently lost Azek, his favored subordinate, he appointed a new tool as Death's consul. However, this new assistant did not satisfy Salinger as Azek once had. Interestingly, the primordial demoness had also contacted Salinger, hinting at a hidden connection with a certain spectator. Given the complex web of relationships, it was clear why Blood Emperor Tudor would want to strike first. He was, essentially, surrounded by enemies. With Lynn keeping a close watch, Tudor knew that waiting could mean even more adversaries aligning against him, possibly even the six gods. Acting now presented his best chance for victory. What Tudor failed to realize, however, was that his own network was already infiltrated by Lynn's loyalists. Aside from the eternal blazing sun and the god of combat, who were aligned with Tudor, the Evernight goddess was Lynn's staunch ally. Though the Earth Mother outwardly opposed Evernight, there was a subtle understanding between them. The Lord of Storms followed Evernight's lead, and the God of Knowledge and Wisdom, a master of alliances, subtly extended an olive branch. Ha! Lynn couldn't help but laugh at the situation, then fell silent, resting his chin in contemplation. For him, this war carried little weight beyond preserving the lives of his allies in the True Creator's camp and his friends like Bethel. With Solomon and Trunsoest, his strategy was simple: gain whatever he could from them, but let go if that wasn't possible. However, his stance toward Tudor and Salinger was clear: they were enemies. Tudor was an old foe, while Salinger was responsible for countless future atrocities. If he could eliminate them, he would. As for the countless civilians caught in the chaos, Lynn had little choice. While war's devastation was inevitable, he would do his best to limit the casualties, shorten the war, and establish a united empire that would improve lives and pave the way for scientific and technological advancements. End of chapter. Speaking of which, when the war ends, I should be able to advance to Paragon, right? Lynn thought with trace of melancholy in his eyes. The ritual for becoming a paragon, while being simple in concept, is really difficult in practice. It requires bringing about enough change in the world. This transformation could be a change in civilization, a massive reform in culture, or a technological leap. Lynn couldn't help but speculate that Artisan had likely participated in the War of the Four Emperors and stayed until its conclusion and advanced the remaining destroyed nations, which fulfilled the ritual's requirements. As for Lynn, he had already caused enough change in the Second Epoch and most importantly in the War of the Four Emperors. His advancement ritual would naturally be complete when the dust settled at the war's end. As for the remaining Illuminator characteristics, Lynn hadn't been idle these past 2 months. He had found all the necessary information and items. Given that advancing to and above the sequence only needs a sequence 0 as the core, along with the uniqueness of adjacent pathways and their sequence 1 characteristic, once Lynn ascended to Paragon, he could attempt to become the demon of knowledge as soon as he obtained the knowledge more faster than I expected, but Lynn's gaze swept over the others in the meeting room, who were already discussing war details, and he chuckled. It's not a bad thing. The sooner I leave, the sooner I can return. 5th Epoch, December 31, 1349, early morning in Backland. While the 4th Epoch was engulfed in war, the 5th Epoch's Backland remained peaceful and calm, giving no hint of the invisible disaster looming over the city. Yesterday marked the end of the final rehearsal, and early this morning, Mr. A, having put on his old equipment, arrived at the secret underground structure of the Augustus royal family. He was once again preparing for the ceremony to summon the true creator with his usual fanatical fervor. Although Mr. A did not fully understand why Aurora Order still insisted on preparing the summoning ritual despite their transition, as a devout believer, he would never refuse such a glorious task or question it. After contacting the Augustus royal family as instructed, he began preparing the new summoning ritual provided by Lynn, who had replaced the old, bloodthirsty ritual with one that was far less bloody. Half an hour left. Mr. A glanced at his watch and silently counted down the time. This was the summoning time agreed upon with the Augustus royal family. At the same time, a sequence for despair was to create a large fog to aid the summoning. Thinking of the despair witch and the vessel of the primordial demoness sent to Mary, a prince, Mr. A's eyes flashed with disdain. If it were the Aurora Order, they would never give away their divine child as a hostage so easily. Even without Incense 008's influence, the third prince still fell in love with Trissa, despite knowing she was once a man. True love is blind indeed. Lynn sighed as he observed the unfolding scene from Red Rose Manor, where he had stationed himself to prevent Cheek from acting out of desperation and taking advantage of Trissa. Moments ago, Lynn had witnessed a love story similar to the original. Trissa confessed to Edisic that not only is she a witch, but she had also once been a man, and that she was only there as a hostage for the demoness sex alliance with the Augustus royal family. Despite being devastated, Prince Edisic still stubbornly loved Trissa and helped her escape, choosing to stay behind and face the consequences alone. While Lynn didn't usually have much patience for lovesick fools, he had to admire the prince's pure-hearted devotion. As a side note, even without Incense 008, the demonist sect still found ways to restrict Trissa, so the overall outcome was not too different from the original. Who are you? Inside the room, Prince Edisic, still reeling from heartbreak, was startled to see Lynn suddenly appear. He instinctively stepped back while fighting the urge to glance at the hidden passage, managing to restrain himself in time. No need to be so tense. I'm just an unimportant spectator, Lynn said, waving a hand dismissively. But are you sure you want to stay here? You'll die, you know. As the discarded pawn in the Augustus royal family and demonist sect's conspiracy, you'll be silenced. Hearing this, Edisic's pupils shrank. His lips trembled, but he managed to say, "This is my responsibility. I am an Augustus. No. Being silenced as a pawn in a conspiracy that will kill countless people is no one's responsibility. Especially not yours," Lynn said while shaking his head. Do you even know what the Augustus family is planning? Do you know how many people will die if this conspiracy succeeds? Prince Edisic's eyes became blank. As a pawn, he knew nothing of the deeper plot. Conservatively, at least 1 million. Maybe half of Backland will be destroyed. Lynn smiled as he continued, not exaggerating in the least. Even if the large fog alone didn't kill tens of thousands, the descent of the true creator would, with massive casualties, regardless of how swiftly the churches responded. How could that be? They wouldn't, they can't do such a thing. Edisic stammered in disbelief, shaking his head and retreating as he glanced at Lynn. You must be lying. But from the prince's pale expression and wavering eyes, it was clear he was beginning to believe Lynn. It's the truth. You want to know what your family is planning. They're summoning a large fog to kill tens of thousands, possibly more, to cover up an even deeper conspiracy. They've even allied with the Aurora Order to summon the true creator into reality. Lynn explained calmly, watching as each word made Edisic's face turn paler. Though not a saint, Prince Edisic wasn't entirely evil and possessed a basic sense of empathy. End of chapter. No, it can't be, it can't be. Hearing the final words, Prince Edisic clutched his ears, retreating to a corner like a frightened hamster. Lynn looked at his denial with little surprise and continued, So, are you just going to stand by and watch those people die? Prince Edisic's murmuring stopped abruptly. His face turned pale, his gaze conflicted. After a few seconds, he looked at Lynn with trembling lips, whispering, but. Then what do you plan to do? You won't let this happen, right? Suddenly, as if grasping at a lifeline, Prince Edisic looked desperately at Lynn. But I'm just a spectator. Lynn blinked and spoke casually, You can't expect me to do anything. After all, it's your mess. Prince Edisic's face became even paler. But I can give you a hand, maybe help you escape this manner. Lynn changed his tone, smiling as he looked at Prince Edisic. If you still have a conscience, you could report this to the church. What will you do? Prince Edisic's body trembled. He looked at Lynn, his mouth opening and closing before finally muttering, I'll go. In the end, he couldn't bear to watch so many people die, even if it meant. I'm going to die anyway, so it doesn't matter much, Prince Edisic tried to comfort himself. Then, he looked at Lynn and asked, How will you get me out? Though Trissa had escaped through a secret passage, her departure had led to a lockdown of the entire manor. It was now under strict surveillance by people sent by Augustus' royal family to watch him. Even if he wanted to leave, it was nearly impossible. That's easy. Close your eyes. 3, 2, 1. Lynn snapped his fingers after counting down. Prince Edisic felt dizzy for a moment. When he regained his senses, he found himself standing outside St. Samuel's Cathedral. Looking at the cathedral, quieter than usual because of the new year, Prince Edisic hesitated but ultimately walked in. I am Prince Edisic. I need to speak with Archbishop St. Anthony, it's urgent. Before he could finish speaking, the clergyman before him interrupted, Prince Edisic, the Archbishop has been expecting you for some time. Outside the cathedral, Lynn stretched lazily as he watched Prince Edisic being led inside by the waiting Nighthawks. Well, that was the path you chose. If you hadn't planned to report, I wouldn't have helped you leave. Since Prince Edisic had become a key witness, his fate was no longer to be silenced. In fact, once he stepped into St. Samuel's Cathedral, even if he wanted to die, the church wouldn't allow it. As for the Augustus family, it was unlikely he could return to them. But such a family willing to abandon anyone so easily, isn't worth staying with. Lynn smirked and turned his gaze to a certain direction. The Evernight goddess should have already dealt with Trissa. Is Klein already fighting the Despair Witch? Despair Witch, a sequence for Despair from the Demoness sect, was even more confused than Prince Edisic. Having used Mr. A's power to reach the Eastern District and prepare for her plan, she was suddenly confronted by a mysterious young man. In an instant, she found herself teleported to a desolate wilderness along with another person. Excuse me, sir, do you know where we are? Despair Witch recovered quickly and flashed a seductive smile at the young man across from her. As she spoke, the temperature around them dropped subtly, as if something ominous was gathering in the air. Klein standing opposite to her didn't answer her question. Nor was he swayed by her charm. Instead, he silently commanded the wraith hidden in the air to possess Despair Witch. A wraith. Just about to attack, Despair Witch suddenly found herself unable to move, her pupils shrinking in alarm. In the Loan Kingdom's royal palace, King George III, who had just learned of the simultaneous disappearance of Trissa and Prince Edisic and Despair Witch's unfulfilled promise, furrowed his brow, feeling an ominous sense of foreboding. It seemed as if an invisible hand had been controlling everything from the start, knowing all their moves and effortlessly crushing their plans. But how was that possible? King George III couldn't figure out who could be behind all of this. They had been so careful, how could there have been a leak? Was there a traitor? As King George III began to suspect betrayal, he heard footsteps. Looking up in confusion, he saw a man in pitch-black armor, covered by a cloak of the same color, holding a scepter, and walking into the palace as if he owned the place. Who are you? King George III shouted, hoping to alert the guards. At the same time, his hand moved toward a box beside the throne, which contained a high-sequence sealed artifact. King George III scrutinized the man's appearance, undeniably handsome, with chestnut hair and blue eyes, a small mustache on his face, and a black crown studded with jewels atop his head. He looked more like an emperor than an assassin. No, he was. King George III froze as he suddenly realized who the man was. This was someone he had seen countless times in portraits, the former Emperor of Intis, the Black Emperor, Russell Gustav. Impossible. How could it be him? Unless, George III recalled the characteristics of the Black Emperor and the legend of Russell's tomb that had never been destroyed, his face growing pale. So, you recognize me. Russell chuckled as he watched the array of emotions play across George III's face. He then turned his gaze to another direction, smiling slyly, no need to hide. Come out. Or were you planning to ambush me? Your Majesty Russell, you jest. The only sequence one hand of order in the Augustus family emerged from the shadows, smiling. But when his gaze landed on Russell, his expression grew grim and despairing. The moment he saw Russell, the hand of order knew that all their plans had failed. The old Black Emperor had returned, there was no way a new one could rise. The hand of order's only thought now was to appease Russell's wrath and preserve what was left of the Augustus family. End of chapter.